And I don't think either of those two would have been able to cope. They'd been anywhere else. And that was the only good thing that happened, was that they were there.
The British royal family is facing its biggest scandal in decades, and this time it involves Princess Anne taking explosive legal action that nobody saw coming. Camilla's son, Tom Parker Bowles, allegedly used Balmoral Castle illegally for a private commercial venture without royal permission, sparking outrage from Princess Anne, who's now dragging him into court. What started as unauthorized use of royal property has spiraled into a full-blown legal war, revealing years of privilege abuse and hidden resentment within the palace walls. What is this venture all about, and how has Camilla responded to this? Join us as we reveal the dramatic details happening behind the palace walls. The illegal Balmoral scheme exposed. In what can only be described as stunning arrogance and entitlement, Tom Parker Bowles, the food critic son of Queen Camilla, allegedly orchestrated an elaborate scheme to use Balmoral Castle for a private commercial filming project without seeking proper authorization from the royal family. The discovery happened almost by accident. Estate staff at Balmoral reported unusual activity during a period when the castle was supposed to be closed for private royal use. Security noticed production trucks, catering vehicles, and film equipment being moved onto the grounds under the cover of early morning darkness. When questioned, the production crew claimed they had full authorization from Tom Parker Bowles himself. Here's where it gets absolutely insane. Tom allegedly told the production company that, as the Queen Consort's son, he had the authority to grant access to royal properties for filming. He'd positioned himself as a royal gatekeeper, someone who could facilitate access to locations that are normally off-limits to commercial ventures. The production company, eager to film at one of Britain's most iconic royal residences, apparently didn't verify his claims with actual palace officials. The project was for a high-end food and travel documentary series that Tom was developing. The concept was to showcase aristocratic estates and their culinary traditions, with Balmoral as the crown jewel of the series. Tom had already secured significant funding from streaming platforms and corporate sponsors in exchange for promises of exclusive Balmoral access. What Tom didn't count on was Princess Anne's unannounced visit to Balmoral. Anne has always been protective of the Scottish estate, which holds deep sentimental value for the royal family. Her late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, loved Balmoral more than any other royal residence, and Anne considers herself a guardian of that legacy. When Anne arrived and discovered an entire film production set up in the castle's historic dining room, her reaction was reportedly volcanic. Staff described her as absolutely furious and shaking with rage at the unauthorized intrusion. Anne immediately ordered production to cease and demanded that everyone leave the property within the hour. The confrontation was so intense that security had to intervene. Tom Parker Bowles wasn't even present when Anne discovered the filming. He'd sent his production team ahead while he attended other business in London, apparently confident that his scheme would go unnoticed or unchallenged. That decision to delegate rather than personally oversee the operation would prove catastrophic for him. Anne's first call was to King Charles III, her brother, demanding to know if he'd authorized Tom's use of Balmoral. Charles was reportedly shocked and insisted he'd given no such permission. In fact, Charles claimed this was the first he'd heard of any filming project involving royal properties. The king was reportedly embarrassed that his stepson had created such a situation. The next call was to the royal legal team. Anne instructed lawyers to investigate the full scope of what Tom had done, including reviewing any contracts he'd signed, money he'd received, and representations he'd made about his authority to grant Balmoral access. What the legal team discovered was even more disturbing than the initial unauthorized filming. Tom had apparently been operating this scheme for months, laying the groundwork and making deals based on promised access to royal property. He'd signed multiple contracts with production companies, equipment rental firms, and hospitality services, all predicated on his supposed authority to facilitate filming at royal estates. The legal exposure was massive. If Tom couldn't deliver on these promises, he'd face breach of contract lawsuits from multiple parties. Even more shocking, Tom had apparently made similar promises to film at other royal properties, including Sandringham and even Windsor Castle. He'd been pitching himself as the royal family's unofficial liaison for commercial opportunities, a role that absolutely did not exist and that he had zero authority to claim. The financial aspect was staggering. Investigators discovered Tom had received substantial advance payments from production companies for access fees and coordination services related to filming at royal properties. Money had been exchanged based on Tom's fraudulent representations of his authority. We're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds paid to Tom personally for access he had no right to grant. Princess Anne was particularly outraged by the commercial exploitation of her mother's beloved Balmoral. Queen Elizabeth II had always insisted that Balmoral remain a private family retreat, not a commercial venue or tourist attraction. Tom's scheme violated everything the late Queen had wanted for the estate. For Anne, this wasn't just about unauthorized use of her mother's property. It was about desecrating her mother's memory and wishes. The legal team also discovered that Tom had forged documents that appeared to grant him authorization from palace officials. These fraudulent documents were shown to production companies and contractors to validate his authority. Creating fake royal authorization documents wasn't just unethical. It was potentially criminal fraud that could result in serious legal consequences beyond just civil liability. When confronted with the evidence, Tom initially tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding. He insisted he'd believed his position as the Queen Consort's son gave him certain privileges regarding access to royal property. His lawyers attempted to frame it as a miscommunication rather than deliberate fraud. But the paper trail was too extensive and too deliberate to support that defense. The situation left King Charles in an impossible position. His stepson had committed what appeared to be fraud involving royal property, putting Charles in the uncomfortable position of having to decide whether family loyalty or institutional integrity should take precedence. The king's initial instinct was reportedly to handle the matter privately within the family, but Anne was having none of that. Princess Anne insisted that Tom face formal legal consequences. She argued that allowing royal family members or their relatives to commit fraud without accountability would set a dangerous precedent. If Tom could exploit royal property for personal profit, what would stop others from similar schemes? Anne demanded that the matter be handled through proper legal channels, even if that meant public embarrassment for the family. The discovery of Tom's illegal Balmoral scheme was just the beginning. When investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a pattern of entitled behavior and questionable dealings that went back years. What else had Tom been getting away with? The pattern of entitlement revealed. As royal lawyers and investigators dug into Tom Parker Bowles's activities, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of behavior that revealed years of exploiting his connection to the royal family for personal gain. And the worst part? He'd apparently been doing it right under everyone's noses. The investigation revealed that Tom had been dropping his mother's royal title in business dealings for years, using Queen Camilla's position to open doors and secure opportunities that his actual credentials didn't warrant. Food critics are common in Britain, but food critics whose mother is the Queen Consort are unique. Tom had weaponized that uniqueness into a business advantage that crossed ethical lines. Restaurant owners came forward with stories about Tom requesting special treatment, free meals, and preferential reservations based on his mother's status. Some described feeling pressured to accommodate him because they feared negative consequences if the Queen Consort's son had a bad experience at their establishment. Tom had created an unspoken threat: treat me well or face potential royal displeasure. Corporate sponsorship deals were another area where Tom's royal connection had been improperly leveraged. Companies paid premium rates for Tom's endorsements and appearances, largely based on his proximity to the royal family, rather than his actual influence or expertise. Marketing materials often featured photos of Tom with his mother or at royal events, creating an implied royal endorsement, neither explicitly authorized nor explicitly rejected, but certainly exploited. Publishing deals for Tom's cookbooks had clauses that specifically referenced his royal connections. Publishers weren't just buying Tom Parker Bowles, the food writer. They were buying the Queen Consort's son and all the publicity and prestige that relationship implied. The financial terms of these deals reflected that royal premium, with Tom receiving advances and royalties far exceeding what a food critic of his actual stature would normally command. Television appearances operated on the same principle. Production companies booked Tom for food and travel shows, not because he was the most qualified expert available, but because he provided that irresistible royal connection. Every show featuring Tom could market itself on the royal angle, drawing viewers curious about the Queen Consort's son. Tom had essentially monetized his mother's position without technically violating any explicit rules, but the investigation revealed that Tom had gone beyond mere trading on his royal connections. He'd actively misrepresented his position and authority within the royal family. Business partners were led to believe that Tom had more influence and access within palace circles than he actually possessed. The Balmoral scheme was just the most egregious example of a long-standing pattern. Event organizers described Tom requesting appearance fees that seemed excessive for a food critic, but that they paid because of his royal connection. Some of these fees were in the five-figure range for relatively simple appearances or speaking engagements. Tom had priced himself based on royal proximity rather than his actual market value, and people paid it. The most damaging revelation was that Tom had been using royal letterhead and royal communication channels for some business correspondence. While not technically illegal, this gave the impression that his business ventures had official royal sanction, which they absolutely did not. Recipients of these communications naturally assumed they were dealing with someone operating with palace approval. Tom's social media was also examined, revealing countless posts that blurred the line between his personal career and his royal family connection. Every photo with his mother, every image at a royal residence, and every mention of attending royal events were carefully curated to enhance his commercial brand. The line between family member and royal profiteer had become impossibly blurred. Staff at royal residences came forward with complaints about Tom's behavior during family visits. He'd allegedly treat staff dismissively, make unreasonable demands, and behave as if he were an actual member of the royal family, rather than a son of a family member. The entitled attitude created resentment among palace workers who felt Tom was exploiting a position he hadn't earned. Princess Anne was particularly disgusted by these revelations. In her view, Tom had spent years freeloading off the royal family while contributing nothing and respecting nothing about the institution. Anne has always been the hardest working royal, someone who believes position comes with responsibility and duty. Tom represented everything she despised: entitlement without effort, privilege without responsibility. The comparison to Anne's own children was unavoidable. Zara and Peter Phillips have both carved out successful careers while carefully maintaining separation between their personal business ventures and their royal family connection. They've never used titles, never exploited their mother's position, and built legitimate careers on their own merits. Tom's behavior was everything the Phillips children had scrupulously avoided. Financial forensics revealed that Tom had earned millions of pounds over the years through ventures heavily dependent on his royal connections: book sales, television deals, restaurant consulting, corporate sponsorships, all of it adding up to substantial income that he couldn't have earned based on talent alone. The royal connection wasn't just helpful to his career, it fundamentally was his career. Tax implications also emerged. If Tom had been earning money by misrepresenting his authority over royal properties and royal endorsements, those earnings might be considered proceeds of fraud, creating potential tax liability. The investigation triggered reviews by tax authorities who wanted to ensure Tom had properly reported all income and hadn't taken improper deductions related to his royal-adjacent business activities. The revelation, which extended over years rather than being a one-time Balmoral mistake, changed everything about the legal case. This wasn't a simple trespass or unauthorized use situation. It was a pattern of behavior suggesting systematic exploitation and fraud. Princess Anne's lawyers had far more ammunition for their lawsuit than anyone initially realized. But Tom's exploitation wasn't just about money and business opportunities. Investigators uncovered something even more disturbing about how he'd been using royal access for his personal social life. What they found next was absolutely shocking: Camilla's desperate cover-up attempt. This is where the story takes an absolutely insane turn. When Queen Camilla learned about the investigation into her son's activities, and Princess Anne's determination to pursue legal action, she allegedly launched a desperate campaign to protect Tom and contain the damage. What Camilla did next would create an irreparable rift within the royal family. According to palace insiders, Camilla's first move was to try to convince King Charles to quash the investigation and prevent any legal proceedings. She argued that prosecuting her son would create a media circus that would damage the monarchy's reputation far more than the original offense. Camilla positioned herself as protecting the institution, but Anne saw it as protecting a fraudster simply because he was Camilla's child. The confrontation between Camilla and Anne was reportedly explosive. Multiple staff members heard shouting from the private meeting room, where the two women argued over how to handle the Tom situation. Anne was adamant that no one, regardless of their connection to the royal family, should be above the law. Camilla insisted that family loyalty and institutional discretion should prevail over legal proceedings. Camilla allegedly offered to personally reimburse anyone who'd paid money to Tom based on his fraudulent promises. She was willing to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds out of her own funds to make the financial damage disappear, hoping that would resolve the matter without legal action. Anne rejected this approach, arguing that it would amount to buying Tom's way out of the consequences he deserved. The Queen Consort then reportedly tried to go around Anne directly to the royal legal team, attempting to instruct them to drop the investigation. This created an unprecedented constitutional question. Could the Queen Consort override a Princess Royal's instructions to royal lawyers? The legal team ultimately decided they had to follow the course of action that best protected the Crown Estate's interests, which meant continuing the investigation. Camilla's next tactic was trying to arrange a private mediation between Tom and Anne, hoping that a face-to-face meeting might resolve the conflict without formal legal proceedings. Anne refused to participate, stating that Tom's actions warranted legal accountability, not a family discussion. The princess was drawing a hard line. This was a legal matter, not a family dispute. The Queen Consort also reached out to media contacts, allegedly trying to plant favorable stories about Tom and negative stories about Anne. Some royal reporters received anonymous tips suggesting that Anne was overreacting to a minor misunderstanding and using the situation to attack Camilla out of long-standing personal animosity. These planted stories backfired when reporters investigated and discovered the severity of Tom's actual misconduct. Camilla attempted to leverage her position to limit Anne's access to certain royal properties and functions, seemingly as retaliation for pursuing the case against Tom. This petty behavior further damaged Camilla's reputation within the family and strengthened Anne's resolve. The Queen Consort was revealing herself to be more interested in protecting her son than upholding the standards of the institution she'd married into. King Charles found himself in an impossible position, trapped between his wife and his sister. Camilla was reportedly giving him ultimatums: support her and Tom, or face consequences in their marriage. Anne was demanding that Charles put institutional integrity above family politics. The king's attempts at staying neutral satisfied no one and made him appear weak and indecisive. The cover-up attempt extended to trying to prevent staff from cooperating with investigators. Camilla allegedly suggested to household staff that their loyalty to the royal family meant protecting Tom rather than providing truthful testimony about what they'd witnessed. Some staff felt pressured to minimize Tom's misconduct or claim they hadn't seen things they'd actually observed. This pressure on staff backfired spectacularly when several longtime royal employees privately approached Princess Anne and described Camilla's intimidation tactics. Anne was furious that the Queen Consort would attempt to obstruct justice and corrupt witness testimony. The attempted cover-up became additional evidence of how seriously corrupted the situation had become. Financial records showed that Camilla had transferred significant sums of money to Tom in the months following the Balmoral discovery, allegedly to help him repay some of the fraudulent fees he'd collected. While perhaps intended as damage control, these transfers looked like attempts to help Tom hide the proceeds of fraud. Anne's legal team added these transactions to their investigation, viewing them as potentially relevant to the misconduct case. The palace press office struggled with how to handle media inquiries about the growing scandal. Camilla wanted all information suppressed and no official acknowledgement of any investigation. Anne insisted on transparency and honesty with the public. The cover-up attempt actually made everything worse for Camilla and Tom. What might have been handled as Tom's individual misconduct became a story about the Queen Consort attempting to obstruct justice and place her family above the law. The ethical stain spread from Tom alone to encompass Camilla's judgment and priorities. But Camilla's interference wasn't the only obstacle Anne faced. The royal legal system itself created barriers that threatened to let Tom escape accountability. The institutional conflicts were about to expose deep dysfunction within the monarchy. The legal battle that shocked the palace. Princess Anne's determination to hold Tom Parker Bowles accountable legally ran headfirst into the complex reality of how royal justice actually works, or, in this case, doesn't work. The first major problem was jurisdictional. Who exactly had the authority to prosecute misconduct involving royal properties? The Crown Estate has its own legal framework, separate from standard British law in some respects. Tom's lawyers immediately seized on this complexity, arguing that standard courts lacked jurisdiction over matters involving royal residences and royal family members. Anne's legal team countered that Tom's fraud occurred in commercial transactions governed by normal contract law. The fact that royal property was involved didn't exempt Tom from standard legal accountability for fraud, forgery, and breach of contract. But the jurisdictional questions created delays and procedural complications that let Tom drag out the proceedings. The question of who could actually bring charges was equally complex. Could Princess Anne, as an individual royal, initiate legal proceedings regarding Crown Estate property? Or did that authority rest solely with the monarch, who happened to be both Anne's brother and Tom's stepfather? The constitutional questions had no clear precedent, creating opportunities for Tom's lawyers to challenge the legitimacy of the entire proceeding. King Charles's refusal to take a clear position made everything harder. The king's lawyers argued he shouldn't be involved in what was essentially a family dispute. But Anne's lawyers countered that fraud involving royal property absolutely required the monarch's attention and authority. Charles's attempt at neutrality became its own form of obstruction by preventing clear authorization for prosecution. Tom's legal team, reportedly funded largely by Camilla, hired some of Britain's most expensive and aggressive lawyers, using every procedural tool and technicality to prevent the case from actually going forward. They filed motion after motion challenging jurisdiction, standing, admissibility of evidence, and even Anne's motivations for bringing the case. The lawyers argued that Anne was pursuing this case not because of genuine concern about Tom's misconduct, but because of personal animosity toward Camilla. They painted Anne as a jealous, vindictive figure using legal proceedings as weapons in a family power struggle. It was a disgusting smear tactic, but it worked to create public confusion about Anne's motivations. Discovery became an absolute battlefield. Tom's lawyers demanded extensive documentation about how royal properties were normally used and what authorizations were typically required. They requested decades of records to find any precedent for informal access arrangements or for family members facilitating property use without formal protocols. The goal was to establish that Tom's behavior, while perhaps improper, wasn't unprecedented. Anne's legal team fought to limit discovery, arguing that Tom's lawyers were on a fishing expedition, seeking to uncover private information about the royal family that was irrelevant to his specific misconduct. The battles over what documents had to be produced and what testimony had to be given consumed months and generated massive legal fees on both sides. Witness testimony created additional complications. The palace staff was reluctant to testify, fearing retaliation from whichever faction they testified against. Some witnesses required subpoenas to compel testimony. Others suddenly developed convenient memory problems when asked about specific incidents. The intimidation and pressure on potential witnesses were intense from multiple directions. The media circus surrounding the case made everything worse. Every court filing, every hearing, every piece of evidence leaked to the press became front-page news. Tom's lawyers used the media attention strategically, spinning every development to portray their client as a victim of royal family infighting, rather than a fraudster facing accountability. Constitutional experts began weighing in publicly, with different legal scholars reaching different conclusions about whether Anne even had standing to bring this type of case. The public debate about royal legal frameworks exposed how unclear and antiquated many of these systems were. The monarchy revealed institutional dysfunction it had successfully hidden for decades. Criminal charges were also being considered by prosecutors, independent of Anne's civil lawsuit. The forged authorization documents potentially constituted criminal fraud, and some of the financial transactions raised questions about money laundering and proceeds of crime. But prosecutors were reluctant to pursue a case involving the Queen Consort's son without the royal family's support. Anne found herself fighting not just Tom's lawyers, but the entire institutional tendency toward discretion and privacy that normally protects royal family members from accountability. The palace machinery wanted this matter handled quietly, internally, and with minimal public exposure. Anne's insistence on formal legal proceedings challenged the unwritten rules about how royal scandals are managed. The financial cost of the legal battle was staggering. Both sides were spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on legal fees, expert witnesses, investigators, and related costs. Anne was reportedly paying her own legal costs rather than using royal funds, determined to maintain her independence and moral authority. Camilla was apparently funding Tom's defense, though the exact sources of that funding were unclear. Settlement negotiations happened repeatedly, with Tom's lawyers offering various deals to make the case go away. Tom would apologize, reimburse certain parties, agree to restrictions on future conduct, and do anything to avoid a public trial and formal judgment against him. Anne rejected every settlement offer, insisting that Tom needed to face actual consequences that would be on public record. The stress on the royal family was immense. Christmas gatherings and other family occasions became impossibly tense. Some family members refused to attend events if certain other members would be present. The traditional united front the royals normally present to the world was shattering, with the Tom case serving as the wedge driving everyone apart. Anne's health reportedly suffered from the stress of the legal battle. Friends expressed concern that her determination to see justice done was taking a toll on her physically and emotionally, but Anne remained absolutely committed, viewing this as a matter of fundamental principle that transcended personal cost. The legal battle exposed how the royal family's traditional systems for handling internal problems were completely inadequate for modern accountability standards. What had worked for centuries, quiet internal discipline and informal consequences, couldn't address serious fraud that involved real victims and substantial financial harm. What do you think about Princess Anne dragging Tom Parker Bowles to court? Was she right to pursue legal action, or should it have been handled privately? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.